struggling with health issues can feel overwhelming. But what if there was a holistic approach that can make a difference? Tune in as Dr. Alan Christianson shares practical strategies and insights on overcoming health challenges through naturopathic medicine. Welcome to the Spa Doctor Podcast, where we uncover the secrets about women's health and hormones. I'm your host, Dr. Trevor Cates, naturopathic doctor, best-selling author, and founder of the Spa Doctor. Every episode, we reveal the best-kept secrets for achieving glowing skin, natural beauty, a healthy body, and a balanced mind. Are you ready to live your healthiest life? Keep on listening. Welcome to the Spa Doctor Podcast. I'm Dr. Trevor Cates, and today we're diving deep into adrenal and thyroid health and holistic approaches. Our guest is Dr. Alan Christianson, who is a remarkable naturopathic doctor with over 30 years of experience. He is a New York Times bestselling author and is a recognized leader in the field of naturopathic endocrinology, having overcome personal health challenges including weight management, seizures, and cerebral palsy. Dr. Christianson is passionate about helping others reset their health and improve their lives. So let's dive in. Alan, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Trevor. Good to see you.
So good to see you. And I know I've heard your story before, but I want everyone listening today to hear your personal health story and what got you into what you do. So let's start with that.
Yeah, happy to share that. And I guess the main point is that knowledge is power. And it's awesome that you're giving people more knowledge. If you lack your health, nothing else is important other than that. So as a kid, I had a lot of issues from seizures, bad coordination, early weight gain. I really couldn't do sports. I remember one time a neighbor kid came over to play and we're running back and forth out in front of the house by the woods. And before then, I felt like I was really swift, like I could just move along effortlessly. And I couldn't keep up at all. And I was just floored about that. And mom said, yeah, but you can read and he can't read. It was no consolation. This is terrible. I can't really do things. I didn't really realize that before. But that path went along, and over between then, which was probably like 3-4 years of age, from then into adolescence, I got more clumsy and less able to do things physically and heavier. I was eating out of consolation, so to speak. And it really went to a low point. Once I was called out for my weight in a gym class, and it was pretty crushing. Adolescence is tough when things are going well, but it forced me into books. I love spending time in the library and reading books about space science or whatnot. But I remember that one day I went to a new section. I got health books. And it wasn't easy, but over time I figured out some things that I could do, and gradually my health changed. And I realized that, as a kid, how big of a deal it was, what a transformation it was for me. And it was information that I really didn't get elsewhere. And I thought, how many others are struggling and not living the life they could just for the lack of some simple help and guidance? So it really drove my whole career.
I know these things can be really challenging to go through, but you've made it a path to help others. So how did you go from your own struggles to being able to help others?
It's cool. I first just assumed that I would go into medicine, figuring that was how you did that, how you went about it. And I kept learning more and reading more over the years, and I was planning on a conventional medical program. But when I was right on the edge of it, some doctor mentors, I shared with them my interest in nutrition, some of the new stats about health or supplements. And they were really not positive about that. They made it clear that if I was doing things that weren't part of standard of practice, I could lose my license, no matter how much I was helping people or how it was tied to evidence. And that just hit me like a ton of bricks. I couldn't even imagine a world where, you could do a good thing and have repercussions from that. And I was just floundering for a while, but then quickly I learned about the naturopathic profession and a new school they were opening up. And so I entered into that. It was exactly the kind of career that I wanted, with a community that supported the ideas of natural medicine and lifestyle as medicine. So that was just a perfect fit.
Yeah. Okay, good. I know that path because I took it too. I'm going to naturopathic medical school. So I know it's such a different approach. And back when you and I went to naturopathic medical school, it's hard to find people that even knew about it, right? Because it was so unknown, but now it's way more popular, so many more students who have graduated and are out there practicing. So it's really great to see the rise in popularity. And we're still having to educate people on the differences and how we are trained as primary care physicians, and our approach is different. But It is such a rewarding path. Wouldn't you agree?
Couldn't agree more. Yeah, it wouldn't change a thing.
So let's talk about weight management. And you have an interesting take on weight management, and you talk about it as the body's hidden weight loss system. Can you explain how you feel about weight? And I know you talked about struggling with your own weight, but how do you talk to your patients about it, and how do you guide them through it?
Yeah, there's weight. It's ultimately our body composition and our waist that matters the most. So weight is a little bit arbitrary, but our waist and a little deeper in that. So the waist, the body has different places that it stores fuel. And some of the more dangerous ones are around or inside the organs. So yeah, and you've heard a lot about belly fat over the years. And oddly, visceral fat is not even the dangerous part. That's another safety place to store extra energy. But when that spills over within the organs, so not just around the organs, but inside of them, then there's danger brewing. And in most cases, when someone's talking about their body shape, that's the part they're concerned about too, is just their waist circumference. So yeah, the concerns cosmetically and the concerns about health come down to really waist loss over weight loss. And there's a million ways you can lose weight short term, but the trick is, how do you have lasting, sustainable waist loss? That's a different question.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And as we get older, it seems to be the area that is more challenging, right? And I hear this from women all the time, and men too, that say, I never had to worry about my waist. I could eat all kinds of things. And now at this point, in my 40s, 50s, different ages, it's like it just won't go away. So what is it about aging that causes more of that?
Yeah, as we age, we store fuel differently. The younger we are, the more we can store extra fuel in our muscle tissue or even in our subcutaneous fat, the fat below the skin. But the older we get, the more those areas get resistant, and the more that same energy ends up really inside the liver specifically. So the liver itself grows in mass over time. Fun fact, you know that it actually gets like 30% larger as the day goes along? Your liver gets bigger or smaller throughout the day. But yeah, it changes in size throughout the lifespan as well.
And so, what are some things that people can start doing around that? If they start to notice their waist size is increasing, what would you suggest them looking at?
Some simple things are just food choices. Some foods make bigger differences than others. One of my favorite examples is onions. There was a pretty big study done in Japan. And this is funny. They're trying to see if one kind of onions was more dramatic than the other in a certain way. And it really wasn't. There was no clear difference. But both types, when added by about like just 2 to 4 grams to the diet, just regular onions, they could decrease the total volume of the visceral fat mass by over 10% in a matter of weeks, just by adding a few extra grams of onions into the day. So yes, the simple food choices can make a big difference.
Yeah, and I'm sure people are thinking, "Oh, he's going to tell me I need to stop eating sugar and go for like a ketosis or something like that." And here you are talking about onions.
It's a weird thing. Over the years, I don't know, the idea of diets being restrictive. Early along, it seemed like the answer was always one more food to cut out, and the more restrictive you got, the better. But I really feel the opposite about that now. There's strong data saying that on a restrictive diet is like taking a broad spectrum antibiotic. Your gut flora is important for everything. Your gut flora feeds on different categories of foods, and different types of flora need different types of foods. So the more categories you cut out, the more your flora cannot be diverse and healthy. So yeah, restrictive diets are just like chronic use of antibiotics.
Wow, that's a really interesting take because that's what so many people hear, right? You need to cut out this and maybe substitute. But I do find that when I first graduated from naturopathic medical school and I knew all the things, all the bad foods that people should avoid, and I would sit down with my patient and say, you need to cut out this and this. And they would just look at me like, that was crazy. What am I going to eat? And over the years, 24 years, you've been in practice even longer, I realize if you tell people things to eat and they start eating things that make them feel good, they're going to start noticing the difference between the foods that make you feel good and the things that don't make you feel good. And they'll go more towards the foods that make you feel good.
Yeah.
Especially if you're talking to them about exercise and sleep and things like that. When people start to get more in balance, they make more of those choices like eating onions.
And that's the thing. Our bodies have this amazing capacity to fix themselves when they've got half a chance. And it's not that foods are harming people, it's that a lack of a variety or lack of range of healthy foods. They're just getting the wrong things in common amounts, but it's more a matter of adding in the good stuff and being afraid of small amounts of something here and there.
Yeah. And let's talk about thyroid. How does thyroid play a role in our weight and then also our overall health?
That's a fascinating one. So, yeah, thyroid disease, this is in the context of autoimmune disease in general, which has been on the rise last few decades. When you and I started practicing is when a lot of this started to pick up. So, the thyroid is unusual in that there's a narrow range of tolerance for a common nutrient. And based upon genetic diversity, some people can't tolerate as much as others. So, in foods that are overly processed, some have unusual amounts of iodine. And for many people, it's not a big deal. But those with the genes prone to thyroid disease, a little extra can be harmful. So when they get above a certain window, they're more apt to have the body start to attack this gland. And the gland itself, it controls how well we burn energy, how well we make energy. Those things go together. So when you can't get rid of weight, you also cannot generate energy. So they're two sides of the same coin. But then also, really importantly, the thyroid affects how we make our connective tissues. So yeah, our skin, hair, nails, there's always old cells that are dying, going away as they should. And as long as there's new healthy cells waiting in line to take their place, it all balances out. But if there's the wrong amount of thyroid hormone, those new healthy cells are not waiting in line to take their place. And we see the connective tissues become impaired.
So when you say connective tissues become impaired, explain a bit more about what would people see and how would they know if their connective tissue needs repair?
Dry, unhealthy skin, inflamed skin, irritated skin, premature aging skin, hair that's brittle, hair that's thinning, especially even and diffuse, hair that simply breaks off easily, unexpectedly, nails that are dry, that have ridges, that have pitting. These are all things that come from even the most subtle imbalances of thyroid hormones.
I'm glad you brought that up because I think a lot of times people, when they think about thyroid, they think about weight, maybe energy, maybe sluggish digestion if it's low thyroid, right? These are also things, though, that people experience. There's a whole host of symptoms that come with thyroid disorders. Can you explain a bit about some of the other symptoms that people might experience?
If you think about the core function of the thyroid for, yeah, energy generation, repairing tissues, the last one is about like nerve conduction. So energy production, fatigue, but then also like brain fog, muscle pain. You don't really want to do things as much. And then back to the weight as well. Weight comes on too easy, won't go away. Connective tissues, you mentioned some of the big ones, the skin, hair, nails, but tendons and ligaments are also affected. People injure more easily. They get fibromyalgia, they get chronic pain. And then the nerve conduction. So this goes back to how well nerves move throughout your body. You can have numb or tingling hands or feet, or unexplained pain patterns, or nerves in the brain. This goes back to mood, unexplained depression, anxiety for no clear reason. Yeah, those are the core three functions. And if you think about what those things do in the body, then the symptoms make a lot of sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And energy is a big thing for people, right? And I think a lot of times people will say, oh, it's because I'm getting older, right? I'm getting older, so I'm tired more. I don't have as much energy. What about fatigue? And how do you know what the cause of that is?
I'm glad you mentioned that. That's such a common thing people say and assume. There was a good study done looking at how well we can generate energy throughout the lifespan. And this one is looking at how fast people could run a mile as they aged. And that's not the same thing exactly as just getting through a day and getting things done, but it is. It's like how well you can make fuel into energy. And what the study showed was that, yes, world-class athletes at age 80 were slower than those at age 18. But the difference was such to where the slowdown at age 64, there was about the same capacity to make energy as there was at age 18. So the slowdown is so minimal. If you're out there and you're 60, 70, 80, and you can't do a lot of stuff, it certainly can be the case that something hasn't worked right for a long time. But that's not the same as age. It doesn't mean you're stuck with it. That's something that can be reversed. So yeah, in almost all cases, it's not really age is an illusion in that context. It's more just accumulation of things that weren't working well for a long time. But the inevitable age birth you can't get away from is real, but it's usually so much smaller than the other factors. So yes, by getting a broader range of healthy foods, good self-care things like you learn about here on this podcast, you can feel great again. You can perform like you were decades younger.
Yeah, that's so true. I know, and it's true that we know people that are older than us that have boundless
Right.
energy.
Yep.
Like I was visiting my mom recently, who's 83 years old, and we went for a hike and we went into her art studio and she gave me a whole tour. And then she said, I'm going to go to the barn and clean the stalls. And I said, I think I need to go get some tea to keep up with you. So but she lives on an organic farm and she has this incredible lifestyle that she's had, and she eats healthy and she's got a great mindset. So a lot of those things make a difference. But we also have to address root causes, because things like adrenal and thyroid imbalances can also cause fatigue, right?
For sure. And that's another big one. So yeah, we've got our stress response, and there's a lot of debates about adrenal fatigue or whatnot. There's some misunderstandings, but our body has a stress response system and it gets thrown off. It's the main thing it does is it controls our daily cycles, when we're waking, when we're sleeping, when we're moving fuel out of our liver into our muscles. All these things are on a daily rhythm. And the tough part is that there's the chronic stress we face in modern life, but also a lot of arbitrary things like when we're exposed to daylight and how much, and whether or not we cool off at night, and things that in the past were cues to regulate our daily rhythm that we often don't connect with. So some of it is a matter of trying to live a life that is freer of unnecessary stress, but a lot of it is just random, simple triggers the body needs to keep things in alignment. And that's what comes under that heading of adrenal health. A big signal to know when the adrenals may be relevant is when a symptom changes at a rhythmic pattern each day. So if you always feel wiped out after lunch, whatever, yeah, if there's a certain pattern to where things come back again, good or bad, at the same time every 24-hour cycle, there's usually some connection with the body's stress response on that.
That's a really good point, because it's usually because we have the cortisol that's supposed to go up in the morning and then it's supposed to go down before we go to sleep at night. So we've got people that every morning they just struggle and they have to have coffee. They can't get going. And then there are also people who sometimes it's the same person, sometimes it's the same person, sometimes it's a different person, where they can't settle down at night. And it's always that evening. And a lot of times that's having to do with our adrenals, right?
And it's so weird, but biologically, we don't automatically stay on a 24-hour rhythm. If you take humans and you put them in caves and they can't see clocks or windows, they don't know what time of day it is, they move on to about a 26 to 30-hour cycle. We don't gravitate to a 24-hour cycle. We need connection with nature to reset the clock every day. I mean, it's literally true. And so if we're too separated from the natural world and its rhythms, we get out of sync and every part of our body doesn't work as well. We feel awful, we get inflamed, we can't digest well. So it's super central to all facets of health.
It's so true. And we are living in such an artificial environment most of the time, where artificial lighting and keeping ourselves awake at night with electronics and having them sometimes all night long. They're still emitting and light all throughout the bedroom. We can't figure out why we can't sleep. And then not getting out in the morning and getting sunlight, getting out during the day, just skipping all of that. It does play a toll on our health, doesn't it?
One of the easiest little action steps that I've given a lot is within your first hour of being awake, get outside for half an hour. It's that simple. You don't even have to be like out bronzing in a Speedo. It's not that. It's just like the sunlight being exposed to your eyes. So yeah, half hour of outside time, first hour of the day. Nothing has a bigger effect upon resetting your daily cycle than that one simple habit.
Isn't that interesting? Because we used to focus everything on your bedtime ritual, making sure that the lights are off in your room. And now we know that morning ritual is even more important.
All those things are good. All those things matter. But if my hands are tied and I only got like one thing I could do with someone, that's where I'd start.
That's great. And I love what you're talking about in tune with nature. We're naturopathic doctors. That's what it's all about. But I think that it's really exciting to see more and more research showing how important it is for us to be in tune with nature and sunlight. So thanks for bringing that up again. And I know people can go and get tested for adrenal and thyroid issues if they feel like they're having some symptoms. So can you explain a little bit about how can someone know if they might have an adrenal or a thyroid issue?
If you get your full checkup and your doctor says everything is fine, but you don't feel fine, something's not right. And could be any number of factors, but it's great to work with someone who will dig a little more deeply. And in the case you had a checkup and there was nothing majorly wrong, that's good. There's probably nothing majorly wrong, but there still could be problems making you not feel your best that could create bigger problems down the road. Find a naturopathic doctor in your area and share your symptoms. And the biggest thing I think is really the first step is the expectation, is not to think that it's okay to feel crappy all the time, not to think that it's expected, not to think that that's normal, not to think that's inevitable with age. So to realize that wherever you are, whatever your age is, you can feel good. You can really enjoy yourself. And if you're not right now, then to realize that change is possible, that it's not radical, crazy stuff, but often once you know what the core issues are, there's usually practical, simple things you can do that can just transform things for you in a short period of time.
Can you take us through a patient that came in to see you for a thyroid problem and kind of what that was like for the patient?
Sure. Yeah. Pretty much everyone that's seen me clinically has already been diagnosed with thyroid disease. They've been on treatment for a long time. And they're often led to think that they can't feel better. They need medications long term. Someone I spoke to about a month or so ago, she was on medicine for 45 years and she wasn't feeling her best. And she was told this is about as good as it gets. And over the course of about, I think, 4 or 5 months, really connecting her with some simple dietary change, exposing her to the capacity to heal her body's stress response, talking through whether her thyroid was working. The short answer is she's now no longer on medication and feeling better again after 45 years. So yeah, my knowledge of the body's capacity to heal, or my confidence in the body's capacity to heal, it grows every year. It's amazing how much we can function great on our own again when we get half a chance.
It's so true. I think a lot of times we do feel like people feel like they have to really rely upon medication and that's the only path. So what are some of the foods that you recommended to her? What kind of diet did you recommend for this patient?
The big trick with this condition is getting in a healthy window of iodine. An unusual story, but if there's a little bit too much, it slows the thyroid. If there's way too little, that's a bad thing. So this case is really all about balance. And those with thyroid disease genetically have a narrower tolerance. So it's really about healthy foods, mostly unprocessed foods, but selecting those that have a lot of good nutrients, but not excessive amounts of iodine. And it's really not anything too weird. Interestingly, there's a lot of extra hidden iodine in things like processed grains you buy commercially, processed dairy products. A lot of poor quality commercial cosmetics also have hidden sources of iodine as well. So being aware of that and being more diligent about your self-care, your personal care products, these things all really add up.
Can you tell us a bit about phytonutrients and what those are and what people should do with phytonutrients?
So this is fascinating. So there's a lot of stuff that we get from food. We get building blocks, energy, regulatory molecules. So we think about those as like macronutrients, proteins, fats, and carbs, or micronutrients, vitamins and minerals. There's a lot of things besides that in food that there's no one of them that we would die without, like we would get scurvy without vitamin C, for example. But they're all things that our body expects to receive, and it uses them to help regulate all of its systems. These are phytonutrients. Now, the funny thing is that they're things that plants made as chemical defenses. So plants have this elaborate game of chemical warfare going on between themselves, between insects, between fungi, so between other plants. So they make insecticides, pesticides, herbicides, and the microscopic amounts of them in the context of a whole plant end up regulating our bodies. For example, broccoli has a thing called glucosinolate. And if you could take a lot of it, it would damage the liver. That's how it kills certain pests. But the speck of it in broccoli, when it hits our liver, becomes alerted and it works better. So these phytotoxicants actually make our bodies self-regulate more effectively. And we really co-evolved with these things being part of our daily intake. So you can have a diet that has just the right amount of vitamins, minerals, proteins, calories, whatever. But if you're lacking these phytonutrients, nothing works as well as it would otherwise.
So phytonutrients, such as in broccoli, what are some other examples of phytonutrients?
One that I love a lot, we talked about energy earlier. There's compounds like betaine in beets. And these compounds help regulate how we utilize oxygen, our nitric oxide pathways. There have been studies showing that the effects they have on athletic performance are on par with banned substances, like things that are not legal for athletes to use, but they're completely safe and healthy. And if you're not an athlete, you still want to be able to have the most energy possible to get through your day, to do things physically, to enjoy your loved ones. So yeah, simple things in foods, they can do that.
And what about phytonutrients for hormones?
This is awesome. So there's so much data about this. Hormones in the body, we make them, and after we make them, they circulate, they get taken up by some receptors, they get eliminated by others. And when things go wrong, it's almost always a matter of not just the crude amount that's there being too high or too low, but how they're metabolized, where they're taken up, where they're not. And plants make the same hormones that humans make. And when we ingest them from plants, it's not so much like we're just taking hormones or adding to the pile, but we're taking hormone regulators. For example, there's a lot of selective estrogen response modifiers in foods like flax. And they make estrogen do more of the things that we would like it to do, make collagen thicker, make bones healthier, help regrow brain cells. But they block bad versions of things like synthetic estrogens from plastics from doing bad things like promoting breast cancer. So they do this stuff at the exact same time. So they act as hormone regulators.
Thank you for bringing that up, because I think there's some scare around phytoestrogens and plant estrogens that you're talking about. Because I know some people say, oh, I avoid flax seeds. Like men that say, oh, I avoid flax seeds because I don't want estrogen. So can you explain a little bit more about why or when people should maybe avoid these plant estrogens, or if they're just safe to use because our bodies know how to use them?
It's pretty fascinating. And things almost always take a little bit of nuance. It's not just that this thing is good and that thing is bad. There's always context involved. But one study, for example, looked at diets high in phytoestrogens, actually from soy, in women who had hormonally responsive breast cancer. For some time, there's legitimate questions as to whether or not these things in high amounts were safe in situations like that. The data first started to show that diets high in them correlated with lower risks of developing cancers, breast cancers. But then what about women who had breast cancer, and even more specifically, hormonally sensitive breast cancers? So the study took women just like that, put them in two groups. One was assigned a very high phytoestrogen diet. One was given no such recommendation. Now, they stopped the study early and shared the recommendation with both groups because the group on the high phytoestrogen diet had dramatically lower rates of death and recurrence. Like the most hard, clear endpoints were radically improved. So yeah, not only do plants not cause harm the way that a lot of a synthetic estrogen might, but they benefit the body in helping the body do a better job regulating whatever hormones it has to work with.
It's so amazing. And again, going back to the power of nature and that balance can occur. And I think this is going to take some work to get people's minds from estrogen causes cancer. So a plant estrogen, we can't be included in someone's diet if they had breast cancer. However, we know everyone's got estrogen. Estrogen doesn't cause cancer. If so, everyone would have cancer, right? Because both men and women have estrogen. But of course, it's the type of estrogen, right? And plant estrogens are very different than our own estrogens, and certainly different than synthetic estrogens that were used in like the studies, and some people are still unfortunately put on them, right?
Totally different.
Yeah, totally different. Let's talk about other benefits of phytoestrogens. How can they be helpful?
The cool thing, there's been good data about them also being relevant for hot flashes. One thing they don't hear about a lot, but figs. There's been big studies on figs. Just adding a few to the diet can cut hot flashes for many by about 50%. And pretty cool, they also showed that adding to the diet, nothing else, but just adding them in can also reverse atrophic vaginitis. So improving the health of the vaginal lining and decreasing symptoms there. A lot of these negative symptoms from the body not utilizing estrogen effectively. But yeah, simple foods like figs can radically change these things.
Okay, so figs, flax, soy, any others that you suggest?
Cabbage, lots of good data on cabbage in this category. Also turmeric having relevant effects, all great for helping in those ways.
Amazing. What about foods for adrenal health?
Yeah, pretty cool thing. So lots of data about how foods affect blood sugar regulation. Now, the adrenals regulate blood sugar, blood electrolytes, inflammation, other hormones, and I mentioned before the circadian rhythm. And the more work it has to do regulating those things, the less resilience they have left. So when your blood sugar is more stable and steady, your adrenal function is easier. Your body has easier time managing the stress of everyday life. And one of the foods I love is a category of compounds called resistant starch. Now, this is something that's has the best elements of fiber and the best elements of carbohydrate and none of the baggage of either. So it's something we find in different foods, and it makes our blood sugar just like completely stable for about 7 to 9 hours after each serving of that. It's really high in legumes, beans and legumes, especially those that are white in color, navy beans, northern beans, cannellini beans. There's also a fair amount of it in potatoes when they're boiled, not cooked at high temperature. And then bananas have it when they're less ripe. So yeah, dietary resistant starch goes a long ways towards stabilizing blood sugar and allowing the adrenal cortisol rhythm to become healthy again.
It's really interesting that you named off those foods because unfortunately those foods have gotten a bad rap with blood sugar because they were a lot of times people avoid legumes, potatoes, and bananas because they think that, especially like a keto or a paleo diet, that's going to cause spikes in blood sugar. But you're saying the opposite.
It's really funny. There's lots of research on this. The actual worst scenario of blood sugar regulation is a thing called glycogen storage defect. It's genetic, and it's a case where people can't store any glucose, and they can go into a coma and die if they don't eat within a few hours. And they found that people like this, if they ingest resistant starch, that's where I was saying these 7 to 9 hour windows. They get 7 to 9 hour windows of stable blood sugar. So when resistant starch was identified first in the late 80s, that was the first time kids with this defect could sleep throughout the night. And it's funny, the body self-regulates so much. So we do know that, yes, keeping our blood sugar stable is good, but it's such an oversimplification and honestly a misunderstanding to say that our blood sugar is just passively the product of ingesting carbohydrate. It's not that carbs go in our mouth and our blood sugar spikes. They now have done studies because you can differentiate when glucose comes from your body making it yourself, like from your liver, or coming from the diet directly. And type 2 diabetics, nearly all of their glucose elevations after a meal didn't come from the meal they ate. It came from what their body released in response to it. So it's not that you ate too much carbohydrate, that's why glucose was high. It's that your body is not using fuel properly. And in many cases, healthy carbohydrate, that can be part of the solution.
It's amazing. And then also how much we move our bodies. If we're very sedentary and we're not burning sugar, glucose, then that also can cause the spikes of their blood sugar. So if we are exercising a lot and we're moving and we're getting outdoors, and then that's going to make a huge difference too, right?
Exactly. We've got these GLUT4 receptors in our muscle tissue that take up glucose and they help our bodies to regulate things properly. And if they're out of commission, then whatever enters the bloodstream has nowhere else to go. But when they're active, you've got a safe place to store it. And not only that, but when you're storing glucose there, that's giving you energy. That's making you enjoy movement.
And another big thing that we can eat all these healthy foods, but if our gut health is not where it needs to be, then those things aren't going to happen, right? The right pathways are not going to happen. And we can start to feel bloated, we can feel uncomfortable, and we can have symptoms that we didn't think we would have. So, for example, some people will say, I don't eat legumes or I don't eat potatoes. And that's because I don't feel good after I eat them. So, what do you say about gut health?
Yeah, such a big thing. The data is pretty clear that it's really about having a diverse flora, a big range of good bacteria. And for a while, it seemed like just taking pills would fix that, and they totally got their place. It's not really the quantity of bacteria we ingest, it's really the diversity of them. And in a lot of cases, it's about things that we can't measure as easily, the anaerobic organisms. So the data is strong that the more wide the range of plant-type residues we get in our diet, the more types of fibers we consume, the healthier our flora is. Now, it's true that if your gut's not working well, you might feel better short-term by going on a very narrow diet. But think about that like an injury in exercise. It might be the case that your leg is not very strong and it hurts less if you put it up in the couch all day. That's not a long-term solution. You need physical therapy. You need rehab. You don't get stronger by doing nothing. It's the same way for the gut. I've seen so many people like that to where they think, oh, this food bothers me, that food bothers me. I'm going to get my diet narrower and narrower. I have seen people who have lived on nothing but like hippopotamus meat. you can actually order that. And they've gotten their diets so narrow because they can't tolerate anything else, you get swept into a corner. And that doesn't solve it. You're just resting an injury. You need rehab. So in those cases, if they do strategically add back in reasonable small amounts of foods that may not feel great in the short term, they can gradually expand upon the range of things they tolerate. So yeah, it's not always a matter of just less and less.
And so this takes us back to really a holistic approach and getting back to nature, right? Nature is so wise in that when we can, right? And again, there might be that initial time where you need that recovery, but as much as we can, getting back to this holistic approach. So that's so amazing. Now you've got lots of books. Tell us about what's going on with you, where people can find more about what you're doing, what's new.
Yeah, most recent is the Hormone Healing Cookbook, and that's really about the story about phytonutrients and using them strategically. So yeah, I identified 5 really recurrent symptoms related to hormonal changes of midlife. So fatigue issues, weight problems, hot flashes, sleep disturbances, and then brain fog. And there's ways you can choose simple foods to target any of those symptoms very effectively. So that's the most recent, the Hormone Healing Cookbook. But my content is all drchristianson.com, and put out new blogs every week and always have fresh information like that coming out.
Thank you, Alan, so much for sharing your insights and your practical advice today. Really appreciate everything that you have shared. And to our listeners, if you found today's episode valuable, be sure to subscribe to the Spa Doctor podcast and leave us a review. And we look forward to having you join us for our next episode. Thanks for listening to the Spa Doctor podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe for more insights and updates. Follow us on social media and stay tuned for our next episode. See you then. Thanks for listening to the Spa Doctor podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and leave us a review. For more insights and updates, follow us on social media and stay tuned for our next episode. See you then. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of the Spa Doctor podcast. See you next Sunday for a new episode on your journey to living your healthiest life at any age.